You know that feeling when you're in a room full of people who are supposed to be your family, but you feel like a ghost? You speak and your words just dissolving to the air, unheard. If you know that feeling, then you know me. My name is Alex, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the quietest people are the ones you should have listened to the most. It started on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that divides your life into a before and after. I was at work, the familiar blue glow of my spreadsheet, a silent testament to my responsible, predictable life. My phone buzzed. Dad. That single word on the screen always triggered the same physiological response, a tightness in my chest, a slight quickening of my pulse. Alex. His voice was a closed door. Hi, Dad. Everything okay? It's done. He breathed the words out with a sigh of profound, almost theatrical relief. The mortgage, paid in full, 27 years, and I've finally done it. The house is finally, completely mine. The word I landed not like a word, but a physical object right in the center of my chest. I've finally done it. The air in my office suddenly felt thin, inadequate. I gripped the edge of my desk. That's great, Dad. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. It is. And to mark the occasion, your mother and I have decided to gift the house to Jordan. A graduation present, a proper start in life for our brilliant child. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe collapsing in on itself. You're giving Jordan the house? The words were ash in my mouth. It's the perfect gift. You're so practical, Alex. You've always been so independent. You don't need it, but Jordan needs the security. We're having a little celebration for them this weekend. It's best if you're not there. You know how you can complicate the mood with that quiet judgment of yours. I remember the feeling. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot, and this was cold. It was the feeling of a final, essential thread snapping. The thread I'd been clinging to for over a decade, the one that whispered, maybe someday they'll see you. Congratulations, I whispered, and ended the call. I sat there for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across my desk. Then, I picked up my phone and scrolled past the family contacts, down to the one person who had never offered me empty platitudes. My uncle, Walter. You want to tell them? I said, my voice eerily calm, a still pond over a deep, cold rage. Or should I? To understand the absolute gravity of that betrayal, you have to understand the architecture of my invisibility. I wasn't just the responsible child, I was the foundation upon which the fun family was built, the load-bearing wall hidden behind drywall and paint. I remember being 10 years old, wearing Jordan's outgrown sneakers to school, the soles flapping, while Jordan himself got a brand new pair of the latest high tops for simply wanting them. I remember the sound of my father's voice at Jordan's piano recitals, booming with pride, and the sound of that same voice at my science fair win, a distracted, "That's nice, Alex. Very neat." The house was my father's monument to himself, a sprawling, demanding Victorian he'd bought when his business was booming, and when the economy crashed, the monument started to crumble. I was 19, home from college for the summer, hunting for a spare key in the junk drawer when I found them, a stack of envelopes, bundled with a rubber band. They were from the bank, official, ominous, final notice, foreclosure proceedings. They were unopened. My parents' solution to a crisis was to hide the evidence, like children shoving broken vase pieces under the sofa. That stack of letters felt like a physical weight in my hands. This wasn't just a house. It was my mother's garden, my father's stupid, proud porch swing.
the worn spot on the stairs where we'd all run up and down as kids. It was the only proof we were a family, and they were going to lose it through sheer denial. So I made a choice, a foolish, noble, devastating choice. I took a second job as a night shift data entry clerk. Then I started freelance bookkeeping on weekends. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled of damp carpet and other people's cooking. My life became a spreadsheet. Income, expenses, and the single significant outflow every month, a wire transfer to my parents' joint account. I told myself it was a loan, a secret loan. I kept a secret ledger, a tiny leather-bound notebook I hid in my underwear drawer. In it, I recorded every payment, date, amount, running total. It was my proof to myself that I was real, that my sacrifice was measurable. The years blurred into a monochrome cycle of work and responsibility. I'd call my mom sometimes late at night. "Oh, Alex," she'd whisper, her voice thick with the gratitude she only ever expressed in private. "You're our guardian angel. Your father, he couldn't bear the shame. You understand, don't you?"
And I did. That was the poison. My father's fragile, towering pride. At family gatherings, he'd stand on that porch, a king surveying his kingdom, and hold court. "This old place," he'd say, shaking his head with false modesty, "a millstone around my neck. But I'll be damned if I let some faceless bank take what's mine. A man provides." And the uncles and aunts would nod, clap him on the back. "You're a rock, Robert." And I would be standing right there, holding a plate of potato salad, my silence costing me another $1,000, another piece of my future. The day after the phone call, I drove to Walter's place. He lived in a tidy, unassuming house on the other side of town, a world away from my father's grandiose Victorian. He answered the door before I could knock, a mug of coffee in his hand. He didn't smile. He just looked at me. His eyes, the same shade of blue as my father's, but infinitely wiser and sadder, seeming to absorb the entire story from my face. "I knew it would come to this, kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I saw the path they were on years ago. Your father, he confuses performance for character." He led me into his study, a room that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. He knelt before a small fireproof lockbox and spun the dial. The click echoed in the quiet room. Inside, nestled atop some old bonds and his will, was a thick, legal-sized folder. The paper was slightly yellowed at the edges. "During the worst of it, when your dad was about to lose everything, I strong-armed him. I told him, 'Robert, if you're going to be too proud to accept help from your own child, then you're going to do it right, legally, no ambiguity.' We went to a lawyer. We set up a trust. I'm the trustee. Your name, Alex, is the sole beneficiary. Every payment you made was documented and notarized. It's all in here. The house isn't his to give away. It's held in trust. For you." He handed me the folder. It was heavier than I expected. I opened it. There it was. My life, reduced to legal jargon and columns of numbers. The Family Home Trust. My name. The payment schedules, matching the entries in my secret little ledger, almost to the dollar. This wasn't just a stack of paper. It was a record of my sacrifice, yes. But now, in Walter's quiet study, it transformed. It became a weapon, a tool of reclamation. The weight of it in my hands was the weight of my own power returned to me. This was the turning point, the moment the ghost decided to stop haunting and start building. I heard about the party through a cousin, Maya, who had always been sympathetic to my invisible kid status. She texted me a video. It was shaky, taken on a phone. There was my father, a glass of champagne in his hand, his arm around a beaming Jordan. In Jordan's other hand dangled his single, shiny key. Purely symbolic, I would later learn. "My gift to you, my child," my father boomed, his voice thick with emotion. "This house, free and clear, a foundation for your brilliant, creative future. May you always have a safe harbor." The lie was so grand, so public, so
cemented. It was the final nail in the coffin of my old life, the one where I hoped for fairness. The morning after the party, we assembled on their doorstep. Me, Walter, and the lawyer he'd retained, Ms. Evans, a woman in a severe black suit whose handshake was firm and whose eyes missed nothing. She was the scalpel to this emotional tumor. I walked up the familiar flagstone path, my heart hammering against my ribs. Out of a lifetime of habit, I reached for my key, the one I'd had since I was 12, the one I'd used to let myself in after school, to feed the cat, to come home after a bad date. I slid the cold, familiar metal into the lock. It jammed, wouldn't turn. They'd already changed the locks. I stood there, staring at that useless piece of metal in my palm. It was the perfect, unspoken confirmation of everything. I was not family. I was a utility that had been shut off. My father answered the door, his face a cloud of confusion and irritation. "Alex? What is this? Now is not a good time. Jordan's friends are still asleep upstairs." We didn't cross the threshold. Miss Evans stepped forward, a polite, professional smile on her face that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Davies, I represent the interests of the beneficiary of the Family Home Trust. As you are aware, the property at this address has been held in this trust since 2009. The attempted transfer of the asset is invalid. Furthermore, as the beneficiary has formally called the loan, and as you are in breach of the trust agreement by attempting an unauthorized transfer, you have 30 days to vacate the premises."
The confusion on their faces was almost comical. My mother, hovering behind my father, brought a hand to her mouth. My father's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then a purpling rage. "This is my house. I paid for it. This is nonsense. Walter, what is this?" And that's when I spoke. My voice didn't shake. It was quiet, but it cut through his bluster like a blade. "No, Dad, I did. Every single penny for 12 years. Over $240,000. I held up the folder. "The bank records are in here. The trust documents are in here. You took my money and you took the credit, but you can't take the house." It was then that Jordan appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a silk robe, squinting against the morning light. "Dad, what's all the yelling? Some of us are trying to sleep." They came down, their gaze sliding over me and Walter and the lawyer as if we were inconvenient furniture. "What's going on?" My father sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Your sibling is trying to steal your house." Jordan's face, still puffy with sleep, contorted into a mask of outrage. "My house? What are you talking about? You gave it to me." Miss Evans remained impeccably calm. "The house was never your father's to give. It is held in a trust for which Alex is the sole beneficiary. The paperwork is quite clear." The scene that unfolded was a masterpiece of collapsing delusions. My father, the great provider, exposed as a fraud. Jordan, the golden child, realizing their inheritance was a phantom. My mother, weeping silently in the background, a lifetime of passive complicity coming due. It was terrible. It was cathartic. It was justice. The 30 days that followed were a storm of guilt and recrimination. The texts and voicemails were a symphony of emotional manipulation. My mother, "Alex, please, we're your family. How can you do this to us, to Jordan, after everything we've built?" My father, "You've always been jealous. You're tearing this family apart out of spite. I will fight this until my last breath." Jordan, "I can't believe you're being so selfish. I actually thought you were the nice one. You've ruined everything."
They hired a lawyer. Of course they did. My father couldn't go down without a fight.
But their lawyer quickly discovered what Miss Evans already knew. The trust was ironclad. Walter had made sure of it. The legal battle was short, expensive for them, and utterly decisive. The judge upheld the trust. The eviction was enforced. I stood in the empty house after they moved out. The silence was profound. It smelled of lemon polish and absence. All the beautiful furniture was gone, the walls were bare, and every footstep echoed in the hollow space. This wasn't a home. It was a shell, a beautiful empty shell that had contained all my hope and all my pain. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the banister I'd slid down as a child, past the doorway where my mother had marked our heights in pencil, now painted over. I stood in my old bedroom, the room that had always felt temporary, like I was just a guest. And I asked myself the only question that mattered now, the question I had never been allowed to ask. What serves my life best? The fallout continued, but its power over me faded. My parents moved into a beige, generic rental. The illusion of their grand life was shattered. About 6 months after they moved, I heard from my cousin Maya again. Jordan's leased BMW had been repossessed. It turned out my father's credit without the facade of the house wasn't so bulletproof after all. The golden child was finally encountering the real world, and it didn't give out participation trophies. The answer was not this house. I didn't need a mansion-sized monument to my own resilience. I didn't want to live in the museum of my neglect. I called a realtor. The house sold in a week for a sum that made my head spin. The money felt clean. It was freedom. It was choice. I paid off my own student loans, the final shackle of my practical education. I met with a financial advisor, a sharp young woman who didn't know my family's history and only cared about my goals. I invested, and then I bought a small, modern condo with floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with light. It had no history, no ghosts. The view was of a city skyline, a future I was building for myself, piece by piece.
The fallout continued, but its power over me faded. My parents moved into a beige, generic rental. The illusion of their grand life was shattered. About 6 months after they moved, I heard from my cousin Maya again. Jordan's leased BMW had been repossessed. It turned out my father's credit without the facade of the house wasn't so bulletproof after all. The golden child was finally encountering the real world, and it didn't give out participation trophies. I learned to set boundaries, not with dramatic speeches, but with a quiet, unyielding finality. I stopped responding to the guilt-tripping texts. I muted the family group chat. When my mother called on my birthday, her voice trembling to ask if I'd reconsidered my cruelty, I simply said, "I have to go, Mom. I have plans." And I did. I had a life to live. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. In fact, the silence that followed was the most peaceful sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of my own soul, no longer being shouted over. Love without respect is not a debt I owe to anyone. It took me 35 years to learn that. The invisible child, the responsible one, the quiet sacrifice, we are often the strongest ones. We've been building our strength in the silence, bearing weights others never saw. We just don't feel the need to perform our strength for an audience. This wasn't a story of revenge. Revenge is about harming another. This was a story of reclamation. I didn't take something that wasn't mine. I simply stopped allowing what was mine, my money, my labor, my future, my self-respect, to be taken. I stopped funding my own invisibility. And I want you to know, if you're listening and you feel that familiar hollowness, that specific ache of being overlooked and used, your sacrifice does not have to be silent. Your love should not be a currency that others get to spend without your consent. You are allowed to ask for a receipt. You are allowed to balance the books of your own heart. Choosing yourself is not harm. It is not selfish. Sometimes it is the first truthful, courageous thing you do. And it is enough.